Howl's Moving Castle, Chapter 5, which is far too full of washing. The only thing to do, Sophie decided, was to show Howl that she was an excellent cleaning lady, a real treasure. She tied an old rag round her wispy white hair, she rolled the sleeves up her skinny old arms, and wrapped an old tablecloth from the blue broom cupboard round her as an apron. It was rather a relief to think that there were only 4 rooms to clean instead of a whole castle. She grabbed up a bucket and besom and got to work. "What are you doing?" cried Michael and Calcifer in a horrified chorus. "Cleaning up," Sophie replied firmly. "This place is a disgrace." Calcifer said, "It doesn't need it," and Michael muttered, "Howl will kick you out." But Sophie ignored them both. Dust flew in clouds. In the midst of it, there came another set of thumps at the door. Calcifer blazed up, calling, "Port Haven door," and gave a great sizzling sneeze, which shot purple sparks through the dust clouds. Michael left the workbench and went to the door. Sophie peered through the dust she was raising and saw that this time Michael turned the square knob over the door so that the side with the blue blob of paint on it was downward. Then he opened the door on the street you saw out the window. A small girl stood there. "Please, Mr. Fisher," she said, "I've come for the spell for me mum." "Safety spell for your dad's boat, wasn't it?" Michael said. "Won't be a moment." He went back to the bench and measured powder from a jar from the shelves into a square of paper. While he was doing it, the little girl peered in at Sophie as curiously as Sophie peered out at her. Michael twisted the paper round and came back saying, "Tell her to sprinkle it right along the boat. It'll last out and back, even if there's a storm." The girl took the paper and passed over a coin. "Has the sorcerer got a witch working for him too?" she asked. "No," said Michael. "Meaning me?" Sophie called. "Oh yes, my child. I'm the best and cleanest witch in Ingery." Michael shut the door, looking exasperated. "That will be all around Port Haven now. Howl may not like that." He turned the knob green side down again. Sophie cackled to herself a little, quite unrepentant. Probably she had let the besom she was using put ideas into her head. But it might persuade Howl to let her stay if everyone thought she was working for him. It was odd. As a girl, Sophie would have shriveled with embarrassment at the way she was behaving. As an old woman, she did not mind what she did or said. She found that a great relief. She went noisily over as Michael lifted up a stone in the hearth and hid the little girl's coin under it. "What are you doing?" "Calcifer and I try to keep a store of money," Michael said rather guiltily. "Howl spends every penny we've got if we don't." "Feckless spendthrift," Calcifer crackled. "He'll spend the king's money faster than I burn a log. No sense." Sophie sprinkled water from the sink to lay the dust, which made Calcifer shrink back against the chimney. Then she swept the floor all over again. She swept her way toward the door in order to have a look at the square knob above it. The fourth side, which she had not seen used yet, had a blob of black paint on it. Wondering where it led to, Sophie began briskly sweeping the cobwebs off the beams. Michael moaned and Calcifer sneezed again. Howl came out of the bathroom just then in a waft of steamy perfume. He looked marvelously spruce. Even the silver inlets and embroidery on his suit seemed to have become brighter. He took one look and backed into the bathroom again with a blue and silver sleeve protecting his head. "Stop it, woman," he said. "Leave those poor spiders alone." "These cobwebs are a disgrace," Sophie declared, fetching them down in bundles. "Then get them down and leave the spiders," said Howl. Probably he had a wicked affinity for spiders, Sophie thought. "They'll only make more webs," she said. "And kill flies, which is very useful," said Howl. "Keep that broom still while I cross my own room, please." Sophie leaned on the broom and watched Howl cross the room and pick up his guitar. As he put his hand on the door latch, she said, "If the red blob leads to Kingsbury and the blue blob goes to Port Haven, where does the black blob take you?" "What a nosy old woman you are," said Howl. "That leads to my private bolt hole, and you are not being told where it is." He opened the door onto the wide, moving moorland in the hills. "When will you be back, Howl?" Michael asked, a little despairingly. Howl pretended not to hear. He said to Sophie, "You are not to kill a single spider while I'm away," and slammed the door behind him. Michael looked meaningly at Calcifer and sighed. Calcifer crackled with malicious laughter. Since nobody explained where Howl had gone, Sophie concluded he was off to hunt young girls again and got to work with more righteous vigor than ever. She did not dare harm any spiders after what Howl had said, so she banged at the beams of the broom, screaming, "Out, spiders! Out of my way!" Spiders scrambled for their lives every which way, and webs fell in swaths. Then, of course, she had to sweep the floor yet again. After that, she got down on her knees and scrubbed it. "I wish you would stop," Michael said, sitting on the stairs out of her way. Calcifer, cowering at the back of the grate, muttered, "I wish I'd never made that bargain with you now." Sophie scrubbed on vigorously. "You'll be much happier when it's nice and clean," she said. "But I'm miserable now," Michael protested. Howl did not come back again until late that night. By that time, Sophie had swept and scrubbed herself into a state where she could hardly move. She was sitting hunched up in the chair, aching all over. Michael took hold of Howl by a trailing sleeve and towed him over to the bathroom, where Sophie could hear him pouring out complaints in a passionate mutter. Phrases like, "terrible old biddy," and "won't listen to a word," were quite easy to hear, even though Calcifer was roaring, "Howl, stop her! She's killing us both!" But all Howl said when Michael let go of him was, "Did you kill any spiders?" "Of course not," Sophie snapped. Her aches made her irritable. "They look at me and run for their lives." "What are they? All the girls whose hearts you ate?" Howl laughed. "No, just simple spiders," he said, and went dreamily away upstairs. Michael sighed. He went into the broom cupboard and hunted until he found an old folding bed, a straw mattress, and some rugs, which he put into the arched space under the stairs. "You'd better sleep here tonight," he told Sophie. "Does that mean Howl's gonna let me stay?" Sophie asked. "I don't know," Michael said irritably. "Howl never commits himself to anything. I was here 6 months before he noticed I was living here and made me his apprentice. I just thought a bed would be better than a chair." "Then thank you very much," Sophie said gratefully. The bed was indeed more comfortable than a chair, and when Calcifer complained he was hungry in the night, it was an easy matter for Sophie to creak her way out and give him another log. In the days that followed, Sophie cleaned remorselessly through the castle. She really enjoyed herself, telling herself she was looking for clues, She washed the window, she cleaned out the oozing sink, and made Michael clear off the workbench and the shelves so that she could scrub them. She had everything out of the cupboards and down from the beams and cleaned those too. The human skull, she fancied, began to look as long-suffering as Michael. It had been moved so often. Then she tacked an old sheet to the beams nearest the fireplace and forced Calcifer to bend his head down while she swept the chimney. Calcifer hated that. He crackled with mean laughter when Sophie discovered that soot had gotten all over the room and she had to clean it all again. That was Sophie's trouble. She was remorseless, but she lacked method. But there was this method to her remorselessness. She calculated that she could not clean this thoroughly without sooner or later coming across Howl's hidden hoard of girls' souls or chewed hearts, or something that explained Calcifer's contract. Up the chimney, guarded by Calcifer, had struck her as a good hiding place, but there was nothing there but quantities of soot, which Sophie stored in bags in the yard. The yard was high on her list of hiding places. Every time Howl came in, Michael and Calcifer complained loudly about Sophie, but Howl did not seem to attend, nor did he seem to notice her cleanliness, and nor did he notice that the food closet became very well stocked with cakes and jams and the occasional lettuce. For, as Michael had prophesied, word had gone out around Port Haven. People came to the door to look at Sophie. They called her Mrs. Witch in Port Haven and Madam Sorceress in Kingsbury. Word had gone round the capital too, though the people who came to the Kingsbury door were better dressed than those in Port Haven. No one in either place liked to call upon someone so powerful without an excuse. So Sophie was always having to pause in her work to nod and smile and take in a gift, or to get Michael to put up a quick spell for someone. Some of the gifts were nice things: pictures, strings of shells, and useful aprons. Sophie used the aprons daily and hung the shells and pictures round her cubbyhole under the stairs, which soon began to look very homelike indeed. Sophie knew she would miss this when Howl turned her out. She became more and more afraid that he would. She knew he would not go on ignoring her forever. She cleaned the bathroom next. That took her days because Howl spent so long in it every day before he went out. As soon as he went out, leaving it full of steam and scented spells, Sophie moved in. "Now we'll see about that contract," she muttered at the bath. But her main target was, of course, the shelf of packets, jars, and tubes. She took every one of them down on the pretext of scrubbing the shelf and spent most of a day carefully going through them to see if the ones labeled skin, eyes, and hair were in fact pieces of girl. As far as she could tell, they were all just creams and powders and paint. If they once had been girls, then Sophie thought Howl had used the tube for decay on them and rotted them down the wash basin too thoroughly to recall. But she hoped there were only cosmetics in the packets. She put the things back on the shelf and scrubbed. That night, as she sat aching in the chair, Calcifer grumbled that he had drained one hot spring dry for her. "Where are the hot springs?" Sophie asked. She was very curious about everything these days. "Under the Port Haven marshes, mostly," Calcifer said. "But if you go on like this, I'll have to fetch hot water from the waste. When are you going to stop cleaning and find out how to break my contract?" "In good time," said Sophie. "How can I get the terms out of Howl if he's never in? Is he always away this much?" "Only when he's after a lady," Calcifer said. When the bathrooms were clean and gleaming, Sophie scrubbed the stairs and the landing upstairs. Then she moved on into Michael's small front room. Michael, who by this time seemed to be accepting Sophie gloomily as a sort of natural disaster, gave a yell of dismay and pounded upstairs to rescue his most treasured possessions. They were in an old box under his little worm-eaten bed. As he hurried the box protectively away, Sophie glimpsed a blue ribbon and a spun sugar rose in it, on top of what seemed to be letters. "So, Michael has a sweetheart," she said to herself as she flung the window open. It opened into the street in Port Haven, too, and heaved his bedding across the sill to air. Considering how nosy she had lately become, Sophie was rather surprised at herself for not asking Michael who his girl was and how he kept her safe from Howl. She swept such quantities of dust and rubbish from Michael's room that she nearly swamped Calcifer trying to burn it all. "You'll be the death of me. You're as heartless as Howl," Calcifer choked. Only his green hair and a blue piece of his long forehead showed. Michael put his precious box in the drawer in the workbench and locked the drawer. "I wish Howl would listen to us," he said. "Why is this girl taking him so long?" The next day Sophie tried to start on the backyard, but it was raining in Port Haven that day, driving against the window and pattering in the chimney, making Calcifer hiss with annoyance. The yard was part of the Port Haven house too, so it was pouring out there when Sophie opened the door. She put her apron over her head and rummaged a little, and before she got too wet, found a bucket of whitewash and a large paintbrush. She took these indoors and set to work on the walls. She found an old stepladder in the broom cupboard, and she whitewashed the ceiling between the beams too. It rained for the next 2 days in Port Haven, though when Howl opened the door with the green blob side down and stepped out onto the hill, the weather there was sunny, with big cloud shadows racing over the heather faster than the castle could move. Sophie whitewashed her cubbyhole, the stairs, the landing, and Michael's room. "What's happened in here?" Howl asked when he came in on the third day. "It seems much lighter." "Sophie," Michael said in a voice of doom. "I should have guessed," Howl said as he disappeared into the bathroom. "He noticed," Michael whispered to Calcifer. "The girl must be giving in at last." It was still drizzling in Port Haven the next day. Sophie tied on her headcloth, rolled up her sleeves, and girded on her apron. She collected her besom, her bucket, and her soap, and as soon as Howl was out the door, set off like an elderly avenging angel to clean Howl's bedroom. She had left that until last for fear of what she would find. She had not even dared peep into it. And that was silly, she thought, as she hobbled up the stairs. By now, it was clear that Calcifer did all the strong magic in the castle, and Michael did all the hack work, while Howl gadded off, catching girls and exploiting the other two, just as Fanny had exploited her. Sophie had never found Howl particularly frightening. Now, she felt nothing but contempt. She arrived on the landing and found Howl standing in the doorway of his bedroom. He was leaning lazily on one hand, completely blocking her way. "No, you don't," he said quite pleasantly. "I want it dirty, thank you." Sophie gaped at him. "Where did you come from? I saw you go out." "I meant you to," said Howl. "You'd done your worst with Calcifer and poor Michael. Stood to reason you'd descend on me today. And whatever Calcifer told you, I am a wizard, you know. Didn't you think I could do magic?" This undermined all Sophie's assumptions. She would have died rather than admit it. "Everyone knows you're a wizard, young man," she said severely. "But that doesn't alter the fact that your castle is the dirtiest place I have ever been to." She looked into the room past Howl's dangling blue and silver sleeve. The carpet on the floor was littered like a bird's nest. She glimpsed peeling walls and a shelf full of books, some of them very queer looking. There was no sign of a pile of gnawed hearts, but those were probably behind or under the huge four-poster bed. Its hangings were gray-white with dust, and they prevented her from seeing what window looked out onto. Howl swung his sleeve in front of her face. Don't be nosy. I'm not being nosy, Sophie protested. That room. Yes, you are nosy, said Howl. You're a dreadfully nosy, horribly bossy, appallingly clean old woman. Control yourself. You're victimizing us all. But it's a pigsty, said Sophie. I can't help what I am. Yes, you can, said Howl, and I like my room the way it is. You must admit, I have a right to live in a pigsty if I want. Now, go downstairs and think of something else to do. Please. I hate quarreling with people. There was nothing Sophie could do but hobble away with her bucket clanking by her side. She was a little shaken and very surprised that Howl had not thrown her out of the castle on the spot. But since he had not, she thought of the next thing she needed doing at once. She opened the door beside the stairs, found the drizzle had almost stopped, and sailed out into the yard, where she began vigorously sorting through piles of dripping rubbish. There was a metallic clank, and Howl appeared again, stumbling slightly in the middle of the large sheet of rusty iron Sophie had been going to move next. Not here either, he said. You are a terror, aren't you? Leave this yard alone. I know just where everything is in it, and I won't be able to find the things I need for my transport spells if you tidy them up. So there probably was a bundle of souls or a box of chewed hearts somewhere out here, Sophie thought. She felt really thwarted. Tidying up is what I'm here for, she shouted at Howl. Then you must think of a new meaning for your life, Howl said. For a moment it seemed as if he was going to lose his temper too. His strange, pale eyes all but glared at Sophie. But he controlled himself and said, Now, trot along indoors, you overactive old thing, and find something else to play with before I get angry. I hate getting angry. Sophie folded her skinny arms. She did not like being glared at by eyes like glass marbles. Of course you hate getting angry, she retorted. You don't like anything unpleasant, do you? You're a slitherer outer. That's what you are. You slither away from anything you don't like. Howl gave a forced sort of smile. Well now, he said. Now we both know each other's faults. Now, go back into the house. Go on. Back. He advanced on Sophie, waving her toward the door. The sleeve on his waving arm caught the edge of a rusty metal, jerked, and tore. Damnation, said Howl, holding up the trailing blue and silver ends. Look what you've made me do. I can mend it, Sophie said. Howl gave her another glassy look. There you go again, he said. How you must love servitude. He took his torn sleeve gently between the fingers of his right hand and pulled it through them. As the blue and silver fabric left his fingers, there was no tear in it at all. There, he said. Understand? Sophie hobbled back indoors, rather chastised. Wizards clearly had no need to work in the ordinary way. Howl had shown her he really was a wizard to be reckoned with. Why didn't he turn me out? She said, half to herself and half to Michael. It beats me, said Michael. But I think he goes by Calcifer. Most people who come in here either don't notice Calcifer or they're scared stiff of him.